the story implies that there's an optimal size of dragon. And I would say, well, your nervous systems are actually tuned to detect the optimal size of dragons. We'll talk about this in great detail as we go through the biology of anxiety and disgust, as it turns out, which is something I've learned more about recently. You know how you can, sometimes if you're engaged in a task, let's say a cognitive task, you can find it overwhelming. It's right, something you're having a very difficult time understanding, and maybe you even wonder if you're up to it. Okay, so you might say, well, your nervous system is indicating to you that that's a threat. And then other times you'll be dealing, say, with a cognitive task that's beneath your abilities. And so it's easy and you get bored. So then you'll be dealing with a cognitive task that it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? The temperature is just right. And what happens is that you have to grapple with the task, and it pushes you forward in your development, but it also really engages you. So you're tied right into it. It's really easy to remember and understand it, and you make progress, and it's difficult and energy demanding, but you're completely captivated by the process. That's the right size dragon. And that's what your nervous system is telling you. It's saying, look, this amount of novel information in this domain is precisely the amount that you can incorporate while optimally transforming the knowledge structures that you already have without exceeding your capacity. And what that does, the way your nervous system signals that to you, is you get interested in it. You know, and because you might ask yourself, like, why do you get interested in things? And you're bored by some things, and some things are overwhelming. It's like you don't have any choice about that. It's not a decision you make, right? It's something you discover as you act in the world. And so dragons of optimal size are engaging, and they push your development. But if they get too big, then they're too much. It could be that. Like the thing about that particular symbol is that it describes the unknown outside of conceptualization. It's pure potential. Now, you know, here's something to think about in relationship to that. I did a little TED talk on potential, which if you're interested in this sort of thing, you might want to look at, because I got it right in that talk, I thought. But, you know, there are different ways of thinking about what the world's made out of. And you know, we think that it's made out of matter. That's the basic dogma, say, of the materialist realm. And I would say, look, it's really useful to treat the world as if it's made out of matter, and look at all the things that treating it that way has allowed us to do. But that doesn't mean it's the final statement about the nature of reality. And whatever matter is pretty damn strange when you get to the bottom of it. We don't understand it at all, and we don't understand its relationship to consciousness. But putting that aside, we also act as if things other than matter are real. So for example, we act as if potential is real. And that's a very strange thing, you know, because potential by its very nature is not really defined, because otherwise it would be potential, right? It would be actuality. But you know, all of you understand your parents when they say, well, you know, you should live up to your potential, or there's potential there. And I would say actually most of the time when we're dealing with the world, what we're dealing with is not the material world per se. What we're dealing with is potential. It's like what we're dealing with, what this could be. And we're trying to realize the potential. And so another thing that you could think about with regards to the symbol of the dragon in particular, it's the predatory reptile more basically, is that it's a representation of potential. And so, I think the reason that it takes reptilian form, and we're going to talk about this in great detail, is I think that what happened as we evolved is that the systems that we originally evolved to detect predators constituted, when we underwent the cognitive revolution that transformed the world into abstract representations around us, that initial predatory detection system was elaborated up into the system that we use to detect the unknown as such. But you know, because it's evolution, the fundamental elements that evolved over the course of evolution remained intact. We're using the same systems. And that system has a language. And so the language is something like, well, the unexpected event is sort of like the snake in the grass, which is perfectly reasonable. You could think about it as a metaphor. I think it's deeper than a metaphor, but you can think about it as a metaphor. And I would say, well, there are we have optimal sized adversaries. And I don't think you can live without an optimal sized adversary, which is also it's a very interesting idea, because, you know, one of the things that people always ask, this is a very metaphysical discussion, is, why there has to be evil and horror in the world. It's like, well, it's not clear to me that the world could be constituted in the manner that it's constituted in any acceptable way if there were no adversaries. It's like, well, maybe the snake in the garden is necessary. Maybe that imperfection and also that adversary is necessary. It's the thing that spurs on development. What would there be without an adversary? Maybe nothing. Because I can give you an example. It's a funny example. There's this little animal whose name I cannot remember, unfortunately, but it lives in the ocean. And in its larval stage, it has a brain and it swims around. It's a little tiny thing. It swims around, like the little plankton and so on. And then at some point during its development, it fastens itself onto a rock and it grows into something that sort of looks like a plant, but it's stable. It never moves again. So as it develops into this stable rock-clinging entity, it basically digests its own brain, and then it doesn't need one after that. And the reason it doesn't need one is, well, there isn't really anything for it to do. It just sits there and filters water and takes, like a sponge sort of, it takes the nutrients out of the water, and the brain is just like it's extra energy using tissue, and so it doesn't need the brain anymore. And so, it's like you don't need to think if you haven't got an adversary. So then you think, well, are there optimal sized adversaries? And part of the little motif of that story is, if you pay careful attention to things as they change, maybe you can keep the damn adversaries optimized. And I think that actually, it may not be true, but it's possible that it's true. And that's something, that's something. If you really pay, because the question might be, and this is something that I thought about when I was developing all these ideas a long time ago, it's like, okay, well, there's obviously some things about existence that aren't exactly the way you might lay them out if you had the choice. Like the fact that people are fundamentally vulnerable and that you're imperfect in 50 different ways and that life is full of suffering, that everybody dies, and all these things that are existential nightmares. It's like, okay, fine. It's easy to judge that as unacceptable, and maybe even worse than unacceptable. Intolerable, deserving of obliteration. You can even go that far, and people do go that far. But there's another question that question begs, which is, yeah, maybe. But maybe if you brought all of your resources to bear on the problem, without holding back, all of them, then that would be okay, then you could master it. And that's possible, So you won't, the thing is, you'll never know unless you try it. That's the thing, because it's actually a claim that requires an existential proof. You can't listen to someone tell you that. And even if it's true for them, that doesn't necessarily mean it would be true for you. The only way you can test a proposition like that is existentially. You have to act it out. But as I mentioned earlier, I see very, very few truly optimistic ideas in profound thought. Most profound ideas are pretty damn pessimistic. But this is one I think that's an exception to that, which is it is possible that you're constituted so that you have enough resources to deal with reality as it actually lays itself out.